In this video, I'm going to tell you how to get yourself prepared to tackle that big army project, or even a small warband. I was having lunch with our man Sam Lenz a couple days ago, and we were eating Mexican food, and it was lovely. We were talking about some plans we've got coming up for the future, both for him and me and for us working together. We'll be filming some stuff in February, so you'll probably see it mid to late February. Look forward to that. But I was talking about how I was trying to come up with something to talk about this week, and I had some ideas and this and that. And then Sam suggested, well, what if you made a video about preparing for a big project? And I actually, a little bit later on in the afternoon, was going through my big list of all the different ideas that I've got stored in my phone for videos, and I came across basically kind of the same thing, although it was aimed a little bit more towards armies and a little bit less away from, say, a big display project. Sam and I in the future will hopefully talk about how to prepare for a big display project, like a big squad that you want to take to a competition, or for maybe like a big, what do you call them, like a big display board and all that kind of stuff, a diorama. But this video is about armies that you're going to use on the tabletop to play with. This is about gaming armies and what you need to do to get yourself moving forward. Honestly, it's a question that I do get asked quite frequently in some fashion or other. I either get somebody who says, hey, look, I want to get into game X, and so I bought this model and that model, and I want to know whether or not these models work best in this situation and whether this goes. And if you're asking for strategy, if you're asking for the strats, this is not your guy. I'm not here to be able to tell you that stuff because I don't know. I'm not good at strategy. But the most important strategy for starting to build yourself an army, and I tell this to every person that I get this question from, is buy the rule book. Don't start by buying models. If you've decided you want to get into game X, buy the rule book for game X. Now, if that type of game is also the type of game that also requires that you buy army books, depending on which army you want to play, like let's say Age of Sigmar's got their battle tomes, although you can do war scrolls for Age of Sigmar, which are free, which is really kind of a nice thing. Or you've got, 40K has got codexes. Then start with the book. Go through the book. If you don't know what even army you want to play with, that's actually really an important thing to start with. Figure out which army you want to play with, and then buy the codex for that army. If you first start off just buying models because you love buying models, and who doesn't love being at the store and buying models, you're going to find yourself potentially buying models that either play in a way that you don't really want to play, or models that don't actually work very well in your army, or at the very least, can't make up the core of your army. Most games, unless you're playing completely like open concept, most games have requirements on how to build an army. There may be points. There may be a number of models. There might be, you have to have a leader, and you can't have 2 leaders, and you can't have 3 of these guys, but you can have as many of these guys as you want. There's troop choices. There's all kinds of different things, and every game is a bit different. But most games require to make at the very least, a legal list, usually some sort of boss, some sort of cool whatever, hero, wizard, warlord, whatever, something big. Not even big necessarily, but it's something that's got the wherewithal to be able to run this whole group of nincompoops who you're trying to traverse across the board and smite your enemies. So you need those guys, and then you need the ground pounders, you need the foot soldiers, you need the troops in many situations. To go back to 40K, still to this day, the FOC, which I forget what it stands for off the top of my head right now as I'm speaking. Force of command? No. See, I'm going to get it wrong. Anyway, the FOC, the bare minimum you need is a HQ unit and 2 troops. That's the straight up. So in those situations, if you start with other stuff, if you're like, yeah, but I really want to buy this really super cool vehicle, you start with the basics. Definitely figure this out. Once you've gone through and read the book and figured that out and figured out which army you want to play, write a list. Sit down and write a list and try to figure out what you're going to need to buy based off that list, and then buy the simplest stuff. The stuff that, at the bare minimum, if you just got these 5 things painted, you could play a very limited, kind of truncated game to get the idea of the rules. Don't go right into the fancy HQ units. Paint one maybe, but I still would tell you to actually start by painting your troops, because if you're also relatively new to the hobby in general, you want to paint the troops before you start painting your HQ units, because you're going to learn a lot by painting the same troop over and over and over again, and then you'll be able to take that knowledge and put it into your fancy leader guy. And I cannot stress this enough, don't buy the entire army all at once. I did a video at Getting Into the Hobby Too Fast a long time ago, pachow, and it also holds true to armies. The thing is, if you sit down and buy your entire army all in one, fell swoop, you got a whole bunch of money from, I don't know, your tax refund or something like that, and you go boom, and you drop it all on that, especially if you're new to the game, you're either going to find a mistake that you made in the way that your list was done, and now maybe you bought these guys and you can't use 4 of them, you can only ever run 3, so now you got extras. Or something else is going to come up. There's always times when you're going to be like, oh, I didn't think of that. And so start small and grow slowly in that situation as you're buying the models to put into your army. The next important thing to think about, though, is, am I just going to build these folks normal, or am I going to convert them in some fashion? Now, if you are starting out, again, I would tell you to probably think real hard about just going the normal road. Build following the instructions, do the things you need to do. If you are not new to hobbying, to miniatures and all that kind of stuff, but you're new into this game, you may want to see, like, some games don't have a lot of conversions, either because of the way the game is structured or because of the way the models are structured. They're very monopose or whatever. But if you're interested, knowing that before you start building can allow you to go either onto eBay and buy extra parts, like different heads you might want to put on, or go onto some other website and buy conversion bits to make their shoulder pads look different, or whatever you're going to do. But knowing that before you start building is super important, because it's real hard to kind of go back and add that stuff later on. Now it's time to start building your models. And one of the big reasons you start building your models is because it helps you to get a really good look at the unpainted but finished product. Understand that depending on your level of fussiness, I might say, you may or may not want to leave parts off. Some people love, on your standard Space Marine who's holding their bolter in front of their chest like this, love to keep that part off as they're painting, so they can paint the little eagle thing and the skulls and whatnot on their chest and then glue it all together later. I'm a big fan of trying to get stuff done as quick as possible. So if there's a sergeant or something who's holding like their arms apart like this, I'll paint that eagle. But if it's a regular troop, I won't, because it just takes a lot extra time, and I don't want to have to go through that. But that's totally up to you. I did a video also about building in, like sub-assemblies and things like that. Pachow, and that's a decision you want to make as well as you paint. But getting and looking at a finished model can really help you to understand the way that the different materials are supposed to be. Oh, that's a leather pouch. I didn't get that from the box. I see. Okay. And that's what really helps you in the next step, which is starting to figure out the colors. If you're going to do a big army game, something like Age of Sigmar, something like Flames of War, something like 40K, those types of bigger games, as opposed to a smaller skirmish game where you're building a warband of maybe less than a dozen units or people. In those big military style games, everybody needs to look a little bit kind of the same. These kind of sneaky dudes who are supposed to go and hide in the bushes and snipe obviously would need to look a little bit more camouflaged in some situations, but they still kind of have to have the same emblems or whatever the deal is. And it depends on the game and how realistic it might be. But understanding that in most situations in the big army games, you can tell whose guys are who by what color they are. That's kind of an important thing to pick out ahead of time. It's also important to sit down and actually look at reference. Go online and look at photo reference. Or artwork reference. If it's a game that's got a lot of lore to it and a lot of things going on and it's been around for a long time, you can look at the way that the artwork in those books have been painted in certain ways. And certain games will have painting guides and say this is the way you should do it. And if you're playing a historical game, you kind of want to follow those, because it's, you don't want to show up to the battle in World War II in red fatigues. It would be a little weird, but you can if you want to, but just understand you're going to get a little bit of flack from the other people playing the game potentially. In a more fantastical style game, a sci-fi or fantasy style game, you can kind of do what you want. But if you want to say, hey, these are Ultramarines, well, then you should try to follow along, especially again if you're new to the game, and try to paint them blue, and that kind of stuff. That stuff's very important to figure out. If you're painting a group of monsters, that's your entire army, you can take a look at a lot of different nature sources. I did a video about that years and years ago, that's about, like, if you're painting lizardmen, look at lizards that we actually have here on Earth and go, oh, that's a cool color scheme. If you're painting Tyranids, look at bugs, that kind of stuff. Figuring all that stuff out first is super important, and doing that research is super important for moving forward in getting your army actually on the table. You should definitely do some test models if you are painting a big army game. If you're painting a big game that's got 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 models in it, if that's your goal, is to paint that giant army, you want to start off by painting 2 or 3 and saying, I like this one. This is the way that it turned out the best. And always be thinking of efficiencies. If you're trying to get stuff done and get it on the table as quick as possible, always be looking for ways to cut corners. And there's nothing wrong with that. But figuring that out and writing it down every step so that you can constantly come back and redo it on squad after squad after squad is super important. If you're painting a warband for a skirmish game, it's probably less important, unless that there's some sort of military unit and they all have to look the same and you're super forgetful like me. Write that down. But if you're just doing a bunch of weird ragtag whatever people in your warband, then you can kind of go nuts. It's important to set deadlines for small portions. Don't say, I have to get all this done by June 1st. It's not a great idea, because without the small deadlines, you won't probably, all of a sudden it'll be 2 weeks till June 1st and you'll be like, but if you're like, I'm going to get, an HQ unit and 2 units of troops done by March 1st, and then I'm going to get these guys done by April 1st, and I'm going to get these units of such and such vehicles done by May 1st, then having that set up and picking those numbers out and writing it down, keeping track of it, put it in your phone calendar, whatever, ahead of time will help you, because it's more manageable. It's smaller bites as opposed to doing, I have to get this entire army done. The plan is to get the entire army done by X, whatever date that is. But if that's the only deadline, it can kind of be problematic and slow you down. Some military person that I don't remember said something along the lines of, no plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And that will also happen in your army project, whether it's a small warband or a big honkin' army. You will find that the local meta, you find out something about it and go, oh wow, nobody uses flyers around here, and maybe I should, because then, or nobody does this, or oh, this is a real problem, or everybody plays this army around here and my army's not great against that army, or whatever, or new models will come out and you're like, well, I gotta have those. Well, now how do I fit them into my army? Understand that these things will happen. Understand sometimes point changes will happen. Company will come out with some sort of update to a points change thing, and all of a sudden your army's 14 points over, or 20 points under, or whatever the goal is for the point size of that army. So keep that in mind as well. Don't just buy exactly the models you need. Like, if you need 9 models for this squad and they come in 5s from the manufacturer, and you go on eBay and buy 4 separate ones, number one, it's probably more expensive than just buying another box of 5. But also, if it turns out that the points change and then you do need a 5th guy, now what do you do, right? So in those situations, be a little liberal with maybe some of that stuff. But again, baby steps. Start small and keep growing the army as you buy it. Build and paint, build and paint. Don't buy it all at once. And that'll really help, because you'll be able to find different places where you can change things a little bit, or things might get changed outside your control, and you won't be too freaked out about it. Lastly, a big army project in a big army game, it can be a big hill to climb. It can be overwhelming when and if, and I'm going to say when, you get overwhelmed, and I've said this a bunch of times on a bunch of different videos that I can't even think of right now off the top of my head. Change tactics. When you just can't paint another red person, another red armored robot man. You just can't do it. Work on some terrain, or work on a small warband for something else, or build a vehicle, or do something. There's a lot of different ways to change your motivation. I do remember that video. Pachow. Sometimes I end up switching from paint mode to build mode. If I've been painting for a month straight on this big project, and then I decide, you know what, I can't paint anymore, and I just go and I sort of build some stuff maybe for a different game or something like that until I can get back to painting again. All of these ideas can help you kind of climb this hill that, to a lot of people, specifically people who are just starting out, look at this as an impossible dream, the concept of a big army game. I will tell you right off the bat, it's easier, and if this is your very first rodeo, it's easier to go into a skirmish game because warbands, most of this stuff kind of really does, apply as well to the warbands, but just in smaller amounts. And some of these things don't apply to warbands, but a lot of these things can help you get a warband done for a small skirmish style game, whether it's Kill Team or Warcry or Conflict 47 or anything like that. Skirmish games can change as far as size is concerned a bit, but understanding that maybe that's the first project to go into. Start with the skirmish game and then go that. But if you are absolutely, all my friends play Age of Sigmar, I got to play 2,000 points of Age of Sigmar because that's what anybody, okay, great. Go through these things and follow this list and work yourself towards that goal, and then you can have some fun with your friends.